In today's video, we take a thoughtful look at the lives and legacies of 19 African-American LGBTQ+ artists whose journeys left a profound mark on Hollywood history. Many of them created groundbreaking art while navigating eras that did not always offer understanding or acceptance. Their paths were often layered with complexity, balancing public acclaim with deeply personal realities. As we revisit their stories, you may find yourself surprised by the contrasts between the spotlight they stood in and the private challenges they quietly endured. Did you know that one rock and roll icon entered a highly publicized marriage during a time of intense scrutiny while privately wrestling with matters of identity? Or that some artists, despite their immense cultural influence, experienced periods of profound isolation that revealed how far society still had to grow? Behind the timeless music, the unforgettable performances, and the glittering careers are human stories shaped by resilience, creativity, and the search for authenticity. This is not about sensationalism. It is about understanding the context of their lives, honoring their contributions, and recognizing how their courage helped open doors for future generations. As we explore these powerful narratives, you may begin to see Hollywood history through a different lens, one that acknowledges both the brilliance and the barriers these artists faced, and invites us to reflect on how far we have come and how far we still aspire to go. If you believe these voices deserve to be remembered and their journeys honored, leave a 1 in the comments below. If you see things from a different perspective or have insights to add, feel free to share a 0 and tell us what you think. Every thoughtful viewpoint adds depth to the conversation. And if you value meaningful storytelling that explores history, culture, and the human spirit, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to help this community continue growing. Your support allows us to keep uncovering powerful narratives that educate, inspire, and spark reflection. Now, let's begin this journey together and discover the stories waiting to be told. James Baldwin, born in 1924, stands among the most influential writers of the 20th century, shaping global conversations through works such as The Fire Next Time and Another Country. As a black man who spoke openly about his sexuality, Baldwin confronted race, identity, faith, and power with unflinching honesty. His essays and novels did not merely tell stories, they challenged systems, questioned assumptions, and demanded moral clarity from a divided nation. During the height of the civil rights era, Baldwin was indeed monitored by the FBI, though this scrutiny was largely tied to his activism, outspoken criticism of racial injustice, and connections with civil rights leaders, not solely because of his sexual orientation. Like many prominent voices of that period, he was viewed as politically influential and therefore subject to government surveillance. Baldwin also faced resistance within segments of the publishing world, where bold explorations of race and sexuality were often considered controversial. Yet rejection never silenced him. Instead, it sharpened his resolve. Through precise language and emotional depth, he illuminated the pain and dignity of marginalized communities. His legacy endures not because he avoided struggle, but because he transformed struggle into literature that continues to challenge, educate, and inspire. By late 1987, James Baldwin's health had declined due to stomach cancer, and he passed away on the 1st of December 1987 at his home in Saint-Paul-de-Vence, France. Though physically weakened, he remained intellectually engaged until near the end, continuing to reflect on art, politics, and responsibility. His passing marked the close of a life that had profoundly reshaped American literature and moral discourse. While Baldwin lived much of his later life abroad, he was not entirely alone in his final days. Friends and members of his extended circle were present, honoring a man whose voice had guided generations. The sense of isolation often associated with exile was complex, chosen in part for creative freedom, yet shaped by the tensions he carried as a public intellectual. His greatest struggle was not simply illness, but the lifelong burden of confronting injustice with honesty. Even so, Baldwin's legacy is not one of confinement or silence. It is one of relentless clarity. Through his words, he carved out space for truth in a divided world, and long after his passing, that truth continues to resonate with urgency and power. There have been rumors suggesting that James Baldwin left behind a final letter detailing years of FBI surveillance tied solely to his sexual orientation. However, historians have found no verified evidence of such a document. It is publicly documented that Baldwin was monitored by the FBI, but this scrutiny was largely connected to his civil rights activism, political commentary, and associations with prominent movement leaders during a tense era in American history, not simply because of his identity. What remains undeniable is that Baldwin understood deeply what it meant to live under watchful systems of power. His essays often examined freedom, fear, and the psychological cost of prejudice. Rather than allowing surveillance or opposition to silence him, he sharpened his voice. Baldwin's legacy endures not through rumor, but through language that continues to challenge readers decades later. He stands as a symbol of intellectual courage, proof that a single, disciplined voice can confront injustice and expand the boundaries of public conversation. His life teaches that truth, when spoken with clarity and conviction, can outlast even the forces that attempt to contain it. There have been rumors suggesting that James Baldwin left behind a final letter detailing years of FBI surveillance tied solely to his sexual orientation. However, historians have found no verified evidence of such a document. It is publicly documented that Baldwin was monitored by the FBI, but this scrutiny was largely connected to his civil rights activism, political commentary, and associations with prominent movement leaders during a tense era in American history, not simply because of his identity. What remains undeniable is that Baldwin understood deeply what it meant to live under watchful systems of power. His essays often examined freedom, fear, and the psychological cost of prejudice. Rather than allowing surveillance or opposition to silence him, he sharpened his voice. Baldwin's legacy endures not through rumor, but through language that continues to challenge readers decades later. He stands as a symbol of intellectual courage, proof that a single, disciplined voice can confront injustice and expand the boundaries of public conversation. His life teaches that truth, when spoken with clarity and conviction, can outlast even the forces that attempt to contain it. Audre Lorde, born in 1934 inches, New York City, was a poet, essayist, and activist whose work reshaped conversations around feminism, race, sexuality, and justice. Openly identifying as a Black lesbian, she wrote with fearless clarity about the intersections of identity and power. Her essays and poems were not only literary achievements but calls to action urging society to confront silence, inequality, and erasure. Throughout her life, Lorde formed deep personal and intellectual connections with fellow activists and writers. While she was married for a period and later had significant relationships with women, there is no verified historical evidence confirming a hidden romantic relationship with Frances Clayton. Much of what shaped Lorde's poetry came from lived experience, community struggle, illness, and her reflections on love in many forms, not solely from secrecy or suppression. Her work transformed personal vulnerability into collective strength. Rather than a story defined by hidden sorrow, Lorde's life stands as a testament to authenticity. She insisted that the personal is political, and she lived that truth boldly. Her legacy reminds us that love, identity, and resistance can coexist, and that poetry can become both shield and sword in the pursuit of justice. In the final years of her life, Audre Lorde faced illness with the same fierce awareness that defined her writing. After being diagnosed with liver cancer, she continued to speak, publish, and advocate, even as treatment grew more difficult. There is no verified record that her final poems were destroyed by family members. In fact, much of her later work was preserved and published, contributing to the enduring strength of her legacy. Audre Lorde passed away on the 17th of November 1992 on the island of Street Croix, where she had chosen to spend her later years. Surrounded by community and the landscape she loved, she remained intellectually and spiritually engaged until near the end. Her reflections during this period emphasized transformation rather than silence, courage rather than concealment. Her life was not defined by unspoken love, but by outspoken truth. Lorde insisted that visibility was a form of resistance, and she lived accordingly. Even in her final chapter, she affirmed that poetry and activism could coexist with vulnerability. Her voice continues to resonate not as a whisper of hidden sorrow, but as a lasting declaration of dignity, self-definition, and radical honesty. Audre Lorde's life was shaped by hardship, yet illuminated by unwavering strength. She transformed personal experience into political clarity, using her pen as both instrument and resistance. Through poetry and essays, she confronted racism, sexism, homophobia, and silence, refusing to separate art from accountability. Her words did not whisper. They demanded recognition, urging readers to examine the systems that divide and diminish. Though not every aspect of her personal life was publicly centered, Lorde believed deeply that truth carried power. She taught that visibility could challenge oppression, and that naming one's reality was an act of courage. Her legacy continues to inspire movements for justice, reminding us that authenticity is not weakness but force. In the end, her story affirms something enduring. Even when love is misunderstood or overlooked, the courage to speak honestly leaves a light that does not fade. Through her work, truth became both shield and torch, and that light still guides those who seek freedom and equality today. Lorraine Hansberry, the brilliant playwright behind A Raisin in the Sun, secured her place in American theater as a bold voice for dignity, equality, and the pursuit of dreams. When her landmark play debuted on Broadway in 1959, she became the first Black woman to have a play produced there, reshaping the stage with stories drawn from lived truth. Her work radiated urgency and humanity, capturing both the struggle and the hope of a generation seeking change. In the early 1960s, as her influence continued to grow, illness began to challenge her strength. Diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, she faced declining health with the same intellectual fire that fueled her writing. Even as treatments weakened her physically, her mind remained engaged, revising manuscripts, speaking out on civil rights, and reflecting on the responsibilities of the artist in turbulent times. Lorraine Hansberry passed away in 1965 at just 34 years old. Though her life was brief, her impact was enduring. The unfinished pages on her desk were not symbols of defeat, but reminders of a voice that had already shifted the cultural landscape. Her legacy affirms a powerful truth. Art rooted in courage can outlive its creator, and sometimes the brightest light emerges from the most fragile hours. Lorraine Hansberry's activism extended beyond the Broadway stage and into broader conversations about justice. In addition to her civil rights work, she contributed essays and letters to publications connected with early LGBTQ+ advocacy, using her voice to support discussions about equality at a time when such positions required real courage. While she did not publicly frame her identity in the terms used today, scholars have noted that her personal writings and involvement in progressive circles suggest a deep awareness of the constraints placed on sexuality in her era. Behind the acclaim of A Raisin in the Sun was a writer intensely aware of how society limited freedom not only through race and class, but also through gender and personal expectation. Rather than silence, she chose coded clarity, weaving themes of confinement, longing, and dignity into her characters' lives. Every line she crafted carried urgency, shaped by lived experience in a world slow to grant authenticity. Her legacy reminds us that even when an era demands restraint, art can become a quiet rebellion, a space where truth breathes between the words. In her final days, Lorraine Hansberry's strength steadily declined as illness progressed. Yet those close to her recalled that her mind remained sharp and engaged. There is no verified historical record of an unsent love letter being destroyed by her family. Much of her personal correspondence and manuscripts were preserved and later studied, allowing scholars to better understand both her public convictions and private reflections. What is documented is that she faced her diagnosis with remarkable composure, continuing to think, write, and speak about justice even as her health weakened. When she passed away in January 1965, New York mourned not only a playwright, but a visionary whose voice had altered the landscape of American theater. The winter may have been cold, but her light did not fade. Rather than a story of erased secrets, Lorraine's legacy is one of enduring clarity. Through preserved works and personal writings, fragments of her inner world remain accessible, reminding us that truth, once written with courage, resists disappearance. Josephine Baker, a groundbreaking performer, singer, actress, and civil rights activist, became an international sensation in Paris, where her artistry and charisma redefined modern performance. At a time when racial barriers limited opportunity in the United States, she found acclaim abroad, transforming stages into spaces of bold expression and cultural dialogue. Beyond entertainment, she later used her fame to support the French resistance during World War II and to advocate for civil rights, proving that artistry and activism could move in harmony. In April 1975, Paris honored her extraordinary legacy with a retrospective performance celebrating 50 years in show business. Under radiant stage lights, Josephine delivered what would become her final major appearance, a tribute not only to her talent, but to her endurance. The audience responded with thunderous applause, recognizing the magnitude of a life devoted to art and principle. When the curtain fell, it was not merely the end of a performance, but the culmination of decades of cultural impact. Josephine Baker's final bow stood as a luminous testament to a career that transcended borders, a farewell framed not by sorrow, but by gratitude for a trailblazer whose influence continues to resonate long after the music fades. That evening, after the celebration, Josephine Baker returned home physically tired but emotionally fulfilled. The Paris lights shimmered beyond her window, reflecting the journey of a woman who had poured decades of energy into performance and principle. Her life had unfolded on grand stages, yet her most personal moments remained her own, guarded, thoughtful, and rarely explained to the public. Over the years, stories circulated about close friendships and meaningful bonds, including connections within artistic circles. Like many public figures of her era, Josephine did not openly detail every aspect of her private life. What mattered most to her was the message she carried through action, dignity, courage, and the belief that art could dissolve barriers. Rather than speaking through headlines, she allowed emotion to flow through performance in a lingering glance, a subtle pause in a melody, a presence that felt both intimate and powerful. Those who truly listened understood that her art was more than entertainment. It was expression layered with depth, resilience, and quiet truths that required no public confession to be real. At dawn, following the celebration of her milestone performance, Josephine Baker suffered a cerebral hemorrhage and was rushed to the hospital. She passed away on the 12th of April 1975 in Paris. While her apartment had been filled with flowers and messages honoring her career, there is no verified historical evidence of a hidden photograph discovered beneath her pillow. Many intimate details about her final hours remain respectfully private, and much of what has circulated over the years belongs more to legend than documented record. What is certain is that Josephine's passing marked the end of a life lived boldly on stage and beyond it. She was later honored with a military funeral in France, a rare tribute reflecting her contributions during World War II and her lasting cultural impact. The applause that once echoed through Parisian theaters may have faded, but her influence did not. Josephine Baker's legacy endures not in whispered rumors, but in the fearless joy she embodied and the boundaries she broke. Her final chapter closed quietly, yet the light she carried continues to shine, a testament to a woman who danced not only for applause, but for freedom itself. Sylvia Rivera, born in 1951 inches, New York City, emerged as one of the boldest early voices in the fight for LGBTQ+ rights, particularly for transgender people and those pushed to society's margins. Growing up in an era when even expressing a different identity could result in rejection or homelessness, Sylvia learned resilience at a young age. She was not simply present at pivotal moments in history. She became one of the figures who demanded that history change. Widely recognized for her role in the 1969 Stonewall Uprising, Sylvia refused to let transgender voices be sidelined in the broader movement for equality. Alongside Marsha P. Johnson, she co-founded Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, STAR, providing shelter and advocacy for homeless transgender youth. At a time when many organizations focused narrowly on limited goals, Sylvia insisted that liberation must include those most vulnerable. Her activism was often fiery, direct, and unapologetic. She challenged exclusion not only from outside forces but sometimes within the movement itself. Sylvia Rivera's life stands as proof that progress is often sparked by those willing to speak when silence feels safer, and that true change begins when the most marginalized refuse to disappear. In 1969, during the Stonewall Uprising, Sylvia Rivera stood alongside Marsha P. Johnson and many others in resisting police raids that had long targeted LGBTQ+ spaces. Accounts differ about every detail of who stood where that night, but what is certain is that Sylvia became one of the most outspoken voices demanding that transgender people, especially those who were poor, homeless, or of color, not be erased from the movement that followed. Soon after, she co-founded Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, STAR, helping create shelter and support networks for LGBTQ+ youth rejected by their families. As the broader equality movement evolved in the 1970s, tensions did arise. Some organizations prioritized narrower goals, and Sylvia often felt that transgender rights were being sidelined. She spoke openly about this frustration, challenging leaders to expand their vision of liberation. While she was not universally embraced at every stage, she was never entirely erased. In later years, her contributions were increasingly recognized and honored. Sylvia's final years were marked by health struggles and financial hardship, realities faced by many activists who dedicated their lives to community work without institutional support. Yet even then, she returned to advocacy in the 1990s, reclaiming her place in the movement she helped ignite. Her story is not simply one of exclusion, but of persistence, a reminder that progress is often uneven, and that the voices once labeled too radical are often the ones history eventually vindicates. In February 2002, Sylvia Rivera passed away at St. Vincent's Hospital in New York due to complications from liver cancer. While intimate details of her final moments remain private, what is known is that members of her community were aware of her condition, and she had re-emerged in activism during the years leading up to her death. There is no verified record of specific last words, but her lifelong bond with Marsha P. Johnson and the shared history they carried remained a meaningful part of her story. Though her life included periods of hardship and marginalization, her passing was not met with silence. Activists, organizations, and community members honored her contributions, recognizing the pivotal role she played in advancing transgender rights. Sylvia Rivera left behind more than memory, she left momentum. The flame she helped ignite continues to burn in movements, advocating for equality and protection for transgender people today. Her legacy is not defined by isolation, but by enduring courage, proof that even when recognition arrives slowly, impact can echo for generations. As you reflect on these journeys, what stays with you the most? A quiet sadness, a spark of anger, or perhaps a deeper sense of compassion? Every story carries layers, and every reader brings their own perspective. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice adds meaning to the conversation. If you believe these histories deserve to be remembered and discussed with honesty and respect, follow the page so we can continue uncovering the lives behind the spotlight. Together, we can ensure that the legacies of those who shaped culture, art, and justice are not reduced to whispers but honored as the enduring voices they truly are.